Okay, so you have a lot of people saying if you talk about Israel this way, it's anti-Semitism. And then you have a lot of other people saying, well, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And the reality is, those things can both be true, right? Like sometimes criticism of Israel definitely veers into anti-Semitism, and sometimes it doesn't. So how can you tell which is which? Okay, so to answer that question, first we need to understand what anti-Semitism actually is. A lot of people think that anti-Semitism works like other forms of racism. You've got one group that looks down on another group, thinks of them as lesser, keeps them impoverished, doesn't give them access to jobs. And that can certainly happen. In fact, Jewish people are more likely to be the target of a hate crime than any other religious or ethnic minority in the US. But a lot of times, anti-Semitism actually takes this other really weird form, and it's something that's really, really unique to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism at its heart is a giant conspiracy theory. It's this idea that Jews are secretly behind all the evil of the world. You know, in ancient times, people were blaming Jews for killing Jesus. In the Middle Ages, people were blaming Jews for the plague. After World War I, Germans blamed Jews for losing the war. You know, when the Soviet Union was threatened by capitalism, they blamed Jews for capitalism. When capitalist countries were threatened by communism, they blamed Jews for communism. You know, you have people saying Jews secretly run the banks, and Jews secretly run the media, and Jews secretly run the government. So it's this shape-shifting conspiracy theory where a society decides that whatever its worst problem is, the Jews are behind it. Jews are this sort of uniquely evil, uniquely powerful force. So how does that relate to Israel? Obviously, Jews are really behind Israel, so it's not like it's a conspiracy theory to think that Jews run Israel. But it is a conspiracy theory when you start saying things like Jews or Israel run the banks, Jews or Israel run the media, Jews or Israel run the United States. The other thing is, these days, a lot of people are concerned about things like settler colonialism, things like civil rights, things like apartheid, all these progressive issues that have to do with oppressing certain groups of people. And a lot of people have decided that the greatest ills of society are these things. And remember how anti-Semitism works. You take the greatest problems of society and you hold the Jews uniquely responsible for them. And so when you turn around and start blaming Israel for these things, you have to be careful. So you have a lot of people saying Israel is like settler colonialism and apartheid and Jim Crow, all just rolled up into one and stuffed into a country. So you see all these huge protests that go on for months and months and months, all for this one tiny country on the other side of the world, when there are so many greater problems in the world and greater examples of all of these things, right? Like settler colonialism, most of the world has been colonized. And looking at a group of people living in their small ancestral homeland and imagining that they are the greatest example of settler colonialism in a world where all of the Americas, all of the Middle East, all of Africa has been settler colonized, and you don't see protests around the world about this. When you start calling for the dissolution of a country, ask yourself, do I often call for the dissolution of countries when I see wars in other parts of the world? Remember, Israel is not the greatest conflict in the world. It's not the greatest humanitarian crisis. So a good way to figure out if anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is, are you acting like Israel is this unique evil? Are you acting like the one Jewish country is uniquely responsible for all the ills of the world or a symbol of all the ills of the world? Or are you talking about Israel like you talk about any other country? Are you talking about the conflict in Israel the way you talk about any other war going on the other side of the world. There are certainly legitimate things to criticize about Israel. It's not anti-Semitic if you are criticizing Israel's policies in the West Bank or its manner of conducting a war. It's when you start treating Israel as this unique symbol of evil in society that must be exterminated. If you talk about Israel this way, it's anti-Semitism. When you start calling for the one Jewish nation not to change its policies, not to act differently, but to be wiped off the map, when you're going to protest for months and months and months about Israel and you're not doing the same thing for other conflicts in other places, it's when you start treating Israel as this kind of fundamental evil that's responsible for everything you've decided is evil in the world.